What went wrong with QPR this season? This is a video I've been thinking about doing for quite a while. It's definitely been one of the weirder, more stressful seasons that I can remember in the last at least 5 to 6 years. And really I just wanted to spend the time unpicking exactly where I think it went wrong. I think a good place to start is the 22nd of October 2022. QPR have just beaten Wigan 2-1 and has sent them top of the Championship. It's new manager Mick Bill's 8th win out of 11 league games, which includes wins over Borough, Sheffield United and Watford, all teams who are looking to go up. And it's the 4th time this season already that QPR have scored 3 goals in a game. Now let's fast forward to Saturday the 15th of April 2023. QPR have just lost 3-0 at home to Coventry City and now sit 21st in the Championship table. We've won just once in the previous 20 matches in all competitions. By this point we've conceded 3 goals in a game 7 times in the Championship. 4 times at home. In fact, at this point we've had more managers than wins in that run, with Neil Critchley and Gareth Ainsworth both having to go at the manager's job since Michael Beale's early departure. It's left us just 3 points above the relegation zone. Of course, by this point you'll know that the Championship season's ended. QPR finished 20th in the Championship, 6 points safe from relegation. But even despite the fact that we survived relegation, it's an absolutely colossal drop-off over the course of the season. So I wanted to do a video to pick apart where I think it went wrong. Before we go any further, I'm new to YouTube. This is one of my first videos that I've done. So if you like what you see, please like, please subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments. So what happened to QPR after we went top of the league at the end of October? Well, that would go on to be our last home win for 5 months. But we need to start a little bit earlier than that to understand what went wrong. You often worry about your best players being nabbed, but it's not so often that you worry about the manager, at least not QPR anyway. Mick Beale joined QPR in June 2022. He was succeeding Michael Warburton, who was our manager for the previous 3 seasons. He ended up leaving at the end of the 21-22 season after a bit of a collapse in the playoff run. We were flying high in the league until February 2022, and after that we really dropped off, and I think the club definitely saw that as a bit of a failure against their own ambitions for that season, and that ended up with Mark Warburton leaving. And I think this was quite divisive for some QPR fans. On the one hand, some fans thought that he'd brought stability to the club. He'd stopped, the continuous management circus that often has happened at QPR over the years. And he was actually bringing in a few good young players over the 3 seasons he was in there and developing them. Players like Eze, who moved on to Crystal Palace, our biggest player sale for years. And, I think a lot of people could see that there were signs of progression. But come the end of that season, there'd definitely been a collapse. Things had gone wrong, and the club decided that it was time for him to move on. So in June 2022, they brought in Mick Beale. QPR had offered Michael Beale his first opportunity to be a first-team manager. So he'd come to QPR off the back of being the assistant coach for Aston Villa and Rangers under Steven Gerrard. And he came to QPR with quite a lot of high praise from the football world. So the rumour was that Mick Beale was actually the talent and the tactical brain behind Gerrard's success, definitely at Rangers. And this seemed something quite exciting for QPR. He was a bit of an unknown, but I think that in itself was exciting because going into the season, I didn't really have any idea how to predict how we would do, if I was expecting a playoff run, or it was just good to see a new face coming in, potentially some new ideas, and see what he has to offer to the team. Gerrard himself once said it would take him 20 years to become as good as an on-pitch coach as Michael Beale, so there was definitely high praise flying about. I'm not sure if that probably says more about Steven Gerrard than Mick Beale, but anyway. QPR brought in a fair few reinforcements over the summer at Mick Beale's request, the majority being free transfers and loans. We brought in Kenneth Powell, a Dutch left-back, Jake Clark-Salter, a centre-back who'd been on loan to various Championship clubs after his contract finished at Chelsea. We brought in Ethan Laird, a young right-back from Manchester United. Tim Irabunam, a really highly rated young centre-mid from Aston Villa on loan. Taylor Richards on loan with a view to a permanent deal at the end of the season from Brighton. And Leon Balogun joined on a free transfer from Rangers, having played for Beale and Gerrard in their tenure. One area that we didn't add to as such was up front. QPR fans have been calling out for another striker over the course of the summer. We'd been left light after Charlie Austin left at the end of the season. Andre Gray's loan had finished, and it actually only left us with one striker in the form of Lyndon Dykes. All throughout the summer, we were hoping for another one to come through the door. Mick Bill talks about himself a lot throughout the summer period, but that doesn't happen by the time the season starts. But by the time we got into the season, that didn't really seem to matter for a while. We were scoring at will. In those first 15 matches, there were signs that the hype around Bill might be warranted. QPR were playing progressive, attacking football. We're playing 4-3-3 with high-flying wing-backs, playing very much in sort of a similar format to what we'd seen from these Rangers teams and Villa in the initial days of Gerrard's tenure. And it was really refreshing to watch after our capitulation at the end of the season. And I think one thing that was really nice to see was towards the end of the previous season, we'd seemingly forgot how to play the ball forward. Warburton's football was very much possession-based, keeping the ball, not forcing the ball forward if there isn't an opening. And what that basically equated to was watching the defence play the ball around the back for half of the match. And it got really, really tedious by the end of the season, especially when we weren't seeing the team in and around the playoffs, which is where we'd expect it to be come the end of the season. And Bill's new football had made a change to that. We were playing attacking, flowing football. We were seeing Elias Chair, Chris Willett get on the ball a lot, linking up. And this was proving a really devastating combo. But of course, we can't have nice things. Mick Bill's impressive start at QPR hadn't gone unnoticed. Wolves sacked their manager Bruno Lage at the start of October after 15 Premier League matches in which they'd only won one game. And of course, as soon as the manager left, the rumour mill started. Mick Bill had supposedly shot to the top of the list of candidates to replace Lage, and within a few weeks, Wolves made their approach. In fact, at 9:30, when the full-time whistle brings our 3-0 win against Cardiff to a close, we all think that that's it, and people in the stands are saying as Mick Bill walks around the pitch applauding that he looks emotional and that that's it, he's off. So goodbye, Mickey.
I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving.
Against the odds, Bill turns the Wolves job down. Wolves is a fantastic football club, and it was a real privilege to be asked to speak to them, but I didn't think it was the right moment because I entered into an agreement here. Integrity and loyalty are big things for me, and if they are the values you live by, you have to be strong. I've been all in here, and I've asked other people to be all in, so I can't be the first person to run away from the ship. So, happy days, right? Well, not quite. QPR went on to win their next match 2-1 against Wigan Athletic, and despite the fact that Wigan are at the bottom of the table at this point, it's a really close, tight match, and I actually felt we were pretty lucky to hold on by the time the full whistle came. And from then onwards, our form took an untimely nosedive, and we went on to lose 4 out of our next 5 games just before the Qatar World Cup started in November. In that run of 5 matches, we scored just 1 goal, so we've gone from scoring 3 goals a game, playing with ease, to suddenly the goals aren't coming. And, definitely the fact that we only had 1 striker in the form of Dykes, we were starting to feel it. The irony is, before the World Cup started, a lot of fans were gutted it was actually coming because it was going to break our momentum. We'd hit a really good run of form, and, we didn't want to see that broken. But in reality, by the time the World Cup came round, it was the complete opposite. We had a fair few injuries coming on, so I thought the break coming was a real positive. Time to regroup, nurse some injuries, go again after the World Cup. And then the unthinkable happens. On the 23rd of November 2022, Rangers sacked Giovanni van Bronckhorst after a year in charge. They're already 9 points behind Selby just 3 months into the season. And even if you don't know what happened, you can probably see where this is going. And so the rumour mill starts again. And, it's a journalist's dream really. Ex-manager, given his first shot at the manager's job, turns down Wolves. He's come from Rangers only a club ago, and he's the obvious replacement. By that point, I think a few QPR fans were actually laughing this off because we were thinking, is this going to happen every single time that a club sacks their manager this season now? Hot up and coming manager, especially a club that he's been working at previously. There obviously were people that were worried too and thinking, actually, no, this is different. And they probably were right to think that way because when Bill actually signed his deal with QPR and did his big introduction video, he was actually asked about a return to Rangers, and he basically said, if Rangers come calling, you don't turn them down. What I didn't realise is that meant after 2 months of being our manager. And to be honest, the Wolves saga had kind of left a bad taste in the mouth when it came to Bill, because he left that situation hanging a little bit, and there were a few days before he actually turned the job down where he basically didn't say anything. I know this is quite common for transfers and for managers, and they're not going to say anything unless they have something to say, but he could have turned down Wolves nice and early. But to me, I think clearly he was entertaining the job, probably mulling over whether it was the right decision or not, eventually decided against that. He'd also been seen at Rangers in the director's box for their 4-1 win against Aberdeen at the end of October, which is a move that a lot of people found quite disrespectful at the time, because Bronkhurst's job was up in the air. The rumours had started that Rangers were going to make the move to move him on. And yeah, it's just not something you do as a manager, so that had already been a little bit suspicious before this had even happened. So why did he go? Well, he'd already said in his opening interview for QPR that you don't turn down a club like Rangers if they come calling. Some people think that, you know, he'd been sold a dream a little bit. Perhaps the club had overpromised what he would be offered at QPR in the summer. We did end up relying on free transfers and loans to build the squad up, and we still started the season without that striker, and that was an issue that was starting to come to fruition as our run turned bad before the World Cup. Other people think that he was on the verge of losing his job. I'm not sure I personally agree with that. We had stuck with Mark Wharton for 3 years. In each of his 3 seasons, he'd had some really bad runs himself, which he didn't get the axe for until the capitulation with the playoff push last season. But yeah, so I don't personally think there's anything in that. But maybe as a first manager, his first opportunity to be a first team manager, he thought that could be on the cards and decided to jump ship before. I don't imagine our owners would have wanted that kind of instability after getting rid of Wharton, especially with the impressive start we'd had. I don't think that would have been overshadowed by a bad run of 5 or 6 games. No one quite knows the reason, but all I know is Mick Beale is Our season resumed on Sunday the 11th of December, just one day after England were knocked out 2-1 to France in the quarterfinals of the Qatar World Cup. But that's alright, because we've got QPR to cheer us up against Burnley. And we still don't have a manager. We lose 3-0 in what very much feels like a bit of a training match for Burnley, definitely with the squad that we put out as well. But it's alright, brush it off, go again next week. Maybe try and get a manager this time. Enter Neil Critchley, aka QPR's best attempt to try and clone Mick Beale. You could kind of see the logic here. Neil Critchley had a very similar coaching background to Mick Beale. They'd both come through the Liverpool academies. They'd both been in and around the same coaches throughout their careers, so I imagine this was QPR's attempt at some kind of continuity. He was also fairly new to management in a similar way to Michael Beale. He'd had a bit more experience. He'd managed Blackpool, winning promotion from League One in his first season in charge. He then kept them up in the Championship the following season, which was definitely an impressive feat given their budget. He then went on to leave Blackpool that summer and ironically replaced Mick Beale as Gerrard's number 2 at Villa. Of course, we know how that ended. A few months later, Gerrard got the sack, and so did Critchley and the rest of his management team. In fact, again, his quick jump to Villa was something that was worrying QPR fans. We've been stung already by Michael Beale jumping ship, and some worried that, you know, is this the same sort of character, or are we going to see this happen again when the next best opportunity comes along? But unlike Michael Beale, this wasn't something that we were going to have to worry about. In fact, it's probably the complete opposite. Critchley's first match was a 1-0 win away at Preston, which was a really impressive first result. Preston were flying high at that point. They were in really rich scoring form. So to keep a clean sheet away there and nick a goal was definitely a really good start and lifted the spirits, I think, of both the players and the fans. But it would turn out to be his only win in 12 matches before he leaves QPR as well, this time pushed by the board. This run included 6 losses, with QPR slipping from playoff hopefuls to relegation candidates in just 71 days. So how did it all go wrong this time? Well, if Critchley made sense from a background perspective, I don't think he really made much sense from a managerial perspective, or at least for this squad. His formation of choice at Blackpool was 4-4-2, and was very reliant on the wingers pushing up high or wing-backs getting in behind. The issue here is that QPR don't actually have any natural wingers at the club. This is why I think that Bill had brought in Kenneth Powell and Ethan Laird as left back and right back, because they could play as high flying wing backs. And I think he recognised that we didn't have that at the club, and that was something that we definitely needed. But by this point, Laird and Powell had both been in and out of injury, We have very little depth in those positions, so actually we were struggling to even get them to play as defenders, let alone bombing up and down the wing. It was taking its toll on their bodies. The other issue is that we don't have two strikers to play up top, which is definitely quite essential in a 4-4-2. So what followed was a gradual switching from Bill's 4-3-3 into a sort of 4-2-3-1 formation. But the problem is the 4-2-3-1 just wasn't working for this squad. Our most effective players like Chris Willock, Elijah Chair, once he eventually came back from the World Cup, they're being cast out onto the wings, often on opposite sides. And I think part of what made it so dangerous in those early part of the seasons was that Bill recognised these players have to be playing together, they have to be linking up, joining in with a wing back on either side. And that was proven to be a really good combination. Even players like Tyler Roberts were joining in that. Sometimes we were playing the three of Willock, Chair and Roberts up front, and that combination was working really well. But I think separating them, isolating them out on the wings, not getting them on the ball was part of why this wasn't really working so well. We end up using the January transfer window to try and rectify some of these issues. So we bring in Jamal Lowe on loan from Bournemouth, and we eventually bring in Chris Martin on a free transfer who's just finished at Bristol City. So we've now potentially got the players that Critchley needs to make his 4-4-2 work. Jamal Lowe makes his debut against Reading away from home, a game that we start 2-0 down in the first half with a double from Jeff Hendrick, which was just the extra knife on the heart given he'd been absolutely awful on loan for us the previous season. But we managed to rescue a point with Tyler Roberts scoring 2 goals to get us back on level terms. And despite not scoring, I think Jamal Lowe actually showed some of what we were missing, which was just a natural striker's positioning, some pace that we're desperately lacking in that side. And to me, from that first game, it looked like a really good signing. But for me, it's our lack of wingers that are still creating a real imbalance in this team. The players we have just don't work in this 4-4-2 formation. By this point, it becomes winger roulette for Critchley. He's putting anyone he can out on the wing. Our 2 attacking mids, he's tried 38-year-old Albert Adoma. Don't know if he actually is 38, but he's getting on a bit. Even our defensive mid Sam Field eventually ends up out on the wing, I think for something like 3 games in a row. He's changed at half-time every time, but Critchley still persists with it. And it's no discredit to Sam Field, but he really isn't a winger, and how that was the solution, I'd never know. Add to that a back line that seemingly have entirely forgotten how to defend, and it's a recipe for disaster. By the time Middlesbrough humiliate us 3-1, the board decided enough's enough, and Critchley's out just 71 days after taking the job. So where do you turn to once you've tried to recreate the small success you were having with Mick Bill? Where do you turn to now to try and turn our season around? And let's face it, at this point, we're getting into a relegation battle, so who do you bring in to solve that? Well, the QPR board decided that the best person to bring in is Gareth Ainsworth, the manager of Wycombe Wanderers. Obviously an absolute cult hero from his playing days at QPR, and that's who gets the job. I've got to say, I love Gareth Ainsworth as a player, but I really was sceptical about this from the start. QPR's owners have tried this before with bringing back Ian Holloway. It seems to be a tried and tested tactics for them, that when things are going wrong and they're getting stick from the fans, at the point that Critchley had been sacked, there's mounting pressure on the board. There's talk of protests, people calling for the owners to sell up. They pull the same tactic. It's let's bring in an ex-QPR legend, and that's exactly what happens. And to be honest, it at least in the initial few weeks, I think it kind of worked. The talk of protests died down a little bit. The feel-good factor had kind of returned, and people were thinking, all right, let's try something drastically different. Going like for like with Critchley's not worked. Let's bring in somebody that's going to try and change things and stir things up. Obviously, Wycombe are renowned for playing very different football to QPR. Some fans see it as slightly anti-football, and QPR fans, some people worried that again, he's just not going to fit the squad we have. Despite the season going off the rails, we still try to play with the ball on the floor. We still try to play progressive attacking football, and is Ainsworth really going to be a good fit for that? I think for me that was a little bit of a discredit, at least at that point. I thought that just because Ainsworth played in that style of football at Wycombe, that doesn't mean he's going to play it absolutely everywhere he goes. Wickham have hardly any transfer budget themselves, so they have to play with the resources they have. And he has had some success with it, with bringing Wickham up into the Championship, nearly keeping them up as well. So the first match doesn't get off to the best start. We lose 3-1 at home to Blackburn Rovers, who themselves are pushing for the playoffs still. And things have continued. Nothing much has changed. And this is backed up by another 3-1 loss at Rotherham. We at this point, I think this was a real low point for our season. We've brought in our third manager to try and change things, and despite the fact it's only been a couple of weeks, we haven't even had the new manager bounce that many clubs see and never seems to be a thing at QPR. That all changes on the 11th of March. So we play at home to Watford, and we finally win after 5 months of not seeing a win at Loftus Road. And to be honest, it's so QPR that we went and won that match, because even in the early parts of the season, when we were doing well, we were dropping points against some teams that you would expect us to be at least getting draws from, and we were getting wins out of Watford and Middlesbrough and just bigger teams with promotion hopes that you just wouldn't have expected to take 3 points from. And that does seem to be a common thing with QPR. We just tend to turn up for these games. And the same happened with Watford at home. We win 1-0. It's a really, really tight match. But there was fight and desire and passion there that we hadn't seen for months, and it was so refreshing. It was genuinely galvanising. I think after the match, it felt like we'd, maybe not so much in terms of results, but we'd turned the corner in terms of, right, these players can actually do it. That fight and desire is still there, and Ainsworth could be the perfect man to bring that out of them. The thing I did say to my dad after that match was, my worry wasn't getting a win, it's getting 2 wins. You want to see them back it up straight after. And I was right to be worried, because just 3 days later we head up to Blackpool, who were below us in the table. They're stuck in the relegation zone, and we lose 6-1. 6-1 to Blackpool. I mean, to be honest, I don't know why I'm surprised. They actually gave us the runaround at home when we played them earlier in the season and beat us 1-0 then. But 6-1, I mean, we were 3-0 down in 20 minutes. It was absolutely dire. And yeah, the lessons we'd hoped they'd learned from the Watford match of that fight, that determination, seemingly all gone out the window again. The defence are running into each other. We have to take off Aaron Drew, who's filling in left back for Kenneth Powell, who'd had a brilliant couple of games for QPR in his senior debut. And they've exploited it, and he's had to be taken off. And it was humiliating, and really, if anything, cemented why there's such big issues at QPR this season. We're seemingly unable to string together any kind of run of form. From there, we seem to resort to type completely, and for the next 7 matches after Watford, we failed to get a win yet again. So it becomes 2 wins from 27 appearances and heading very much for relegation. And I have to admit, I think that was a really strong possibility. Couldn't see where the points were going to come from, and we were losing key matches to teams around us. Losing to Rotherham, they're in the relegation battle. Blackpool, these are all matches where you have to pick up your points in these kind of battles, and we just weren't. Until we pull off the same trick that we did against Watford, and we seem to, have a knack for the unexpected, and somehow pull off a 2-1 win against Burnley at Turf Moor, a team that hadn't lost the entire season at home, and we take 3 points away from there. Just makes very, very little sense. But to Ainsworth's credit, the football in this run again had been dire. He was seemingly not able to get anything out of them. He'd started to resort to hoofball, and it's really, really not pretty to watch, and I can't say I got much enjoyment out of this run of games at all. Even this Burnley match, despite the goals and the win, it was painful to watch. We were under the cosh the entire match. But when you win, you've got the backs of the wall and you hit them on the break, and it works, especially against a team like Burnley, where you really didn't expect the points. The feeling was amazing, and you start to get a glimmer of hope of, could we do this? Could we stay up? So after that, we've got a glimmer of hope that we can stay up in the final 2 games, and if results go our way, a win should do the trick. So we have Stoke to play in Bristol City, and we managed to confirm our safety the following week against Stoke with a 1-0 win. Again, it really wasn't pretty. It was a very similar match, but there was a complete lack of quality from both teams. And to be honest, I think Stoke were on the beach a little bit, so it was pretty inevitable that we were going to take some from the match. But it confirmed our safety. We were staying up in the Championship. I think probably the thing that disappoints me about this end of the season is obviously the terrible season aside. The last home match was against Bristol City. It was a match that we potentially could have been needing something from to stay up. We now weren't, and now is an opportunity to see something slightly different. We'd been playing this really negative defensive football for a long time now, and it wasn't pretty to watch. And going back to what I said earlier about, I felt it was a discredit to assume that Ainsworth would play in that way. Now was an opportunity to say, all right, we're safe, we're going to do something a bit different, maybe try out a few things for the coming season, and we might see a slightly different style to his play. But we don't. We see a very similar team, a similar setup, a really defensive display despite the fact that we're staying up, and we lose 2-0 to Bristol City. And look, the result doesn't matter at all, but I think that was an opportunity to throw in some younger players, throw in some players we hadn't seen for a while, and do something different. But Ainsworth kept the same tact, and I think there are a few players in the team that he put in to give fans the chance to say goodbye. Players like Luke Amos, who's now left the club. I understand the sentiment maybe slightly, but he'd barely appeared for us all of this season. I'm not pinning the blame on Amos at all, but to me there was very little sentimental value in doing that, and I don't think the atmosphere was going to be good enough to sort of warrant those kind of send-offs. So that brought our season to the end, and obviously, as I say, we stayed up. It's been a really, really tough season to follow as a fan. I think for me, looking at where it went wrong this season, I think it runs so much deeper than the managers that we've had. I think you need to start asking questions of the ownership, of Les Ferdinand as our director of football, Lee Hughes as our chief executive. The latter two in particular obviously get a lot of flack from our fans, and I don't think it's undeserved. I think when you're looking on the director of football front, what is a director of football there to do? He's there to bring in some continuity between managers whenever a manager departs, and help make sure that you're bringing in players that add up into the overall system. The whole point is it goes beyond the manager, right? So, if a manager gets sacked, they leave, they go to another club, as happened twice this season, it ensures that the wheels don't come off. And simply put, that didn't happen. And to me, that sort of highlights some of Les's shortcomings as a director of football. I think on the signing front, the players that were brought in this season, the signings have been really poor. I think on one count, I've never seen so many new players injured in a season. Leon Balogun, centre-back, completely disappeared from injury coincidentally after McBill left. The thought was that he was waiting for the call from McBill over January that never came. He eventually appeared for a last couple of games, put in some pretty poor displays, and then disappeared once again. Taylor Richards, who we've now signed on a permanent deal after his loan this season from Brighton, he made just one first team start throughout the entire season, and the club just don't explain these absences. But the more worrying thing is we seem to be signing these players without any regard for their previous injury history. Taylor Richards got injured in his medical for Birmingham the previous season on loan. Obviously very unfortunate, but none of these players that are getting injured these aren't first time things. We know it's happening in their history, and I appreciate that's probably where we are as a club. We can't spend high because of FFP, so we're having to look at players that are free or on low fees, and sometimes that means looking at players with injury histories. But you cannot piece together a squad when that is based on a team like that, because we nearly paid the cost of our championship place as a result. I think another issue when we talk about Les Ferdinand and Lee Hughes is, Lee Hughes as a chief executive, again, your role is to look at the revenue streams in the club, make sure that we're in the best position as a business. and I'm not sure that's happening either. I mean, he was on one of the QPR fan podcasts earlier this season and pretty much laughed at the people on the podcast who made suggestions for ways to bring more fans into the ground, and just laughed it off as another thing that the fans have to moan about, basically. I think that's poor on one level as a representative of the club, but also our revenue compared to other clubs is so low. I mean, there was some figures posted on Twitter, I'll put them on screen, but you know, that compared to some of the clubs in that league, we really should be higher. These are untapped streams of revenue, which we need to be utilising as best as we possibly can, especially when the margins are so tight with transfer fees and with FFP. Even at this point, we've heard very little from the owners about the capitulation this season, and you know, when you think that last season ended with Mark Warburton's rolling contract not being renewed because we hadn't made the playoffs, well, who becomes accountable then for what's happened this season? I'd really like the owners, one, to talk about what they think happened this season, what they want the ambitions to be for next season, and you know, two, actually make some changes. I mean, Gareth Ainsworth talked at the end of the season about there needs to be an expectations reset amongst the QPR fans. I'm really not sure what he thinks those expectations were, because despite that brilliant run that we had at the start of the season, we all knew that it was only 11 games that had put us at the top of the league. We weren't getting that carried away as to think we were going to win the league or definitely be in the playoffs, but we didn't expect the drop-off that we'd seen. So I'm not sure what the club think those expectations are. I personally would like the owners and the club and Ainsworth to tell us what their expectations are for the season, because then we can react accordingly. You know, if we're told that this next season is about stability and building again, then that's one thing. But if we start next season and miraculously have a brilliant start of the season again, are we overachieving? Are we underachieving? We need some dialogue from the club there to be able to understand what actually our expectations are. Thank you very much for listening to this. I appreciate it's not the most positive video, but I really wanted to break down the story for, especially for non-QPR fans. I think it's an interesting one, and for QPR fans too. So I'd love to hear what you think. Let me know what you think in the comments, and yeah, I'll see you next time.